Subscribe to The Honest Critique for current affairs, movie, book, and product reviews. Also, make sure you press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the video series are solely those of the individuals and do not necessarily represent those of The Honest Critique and its employees. The following video contains strong language which may be offensive to some viewers. Viewer discretion advised.
So hello and welcome to a very special episode we are recording today. I am delighted to be joined by Professor Gail Helt. She is the Assistant Professor of Political Science and Director of King Security and Intelligence Study. She had over a dozen years of experience working at the CIA. So thank you, ma'am, for taking your time and speaking to us.
Thanks so much for having me.
I wanted to start the conversation actually with something of your experience of actually dealing with young kids, and often at times we have seen people do make mistakes. But what we saw a couple of days back, a letter which was not even written by Bin Laden but Zawahiri actually, got famous, called Title to America, and Bin Laden was all of a sudden trending on TikTok. So your initial reaction on someone who have probably tracked Al-Qaeda activities for the CIA for over a decade and seeing America's villain becoming a hero all of a sudden for some Gen Z kids?
Well, so I never was responsible for tracking bin Laden, so that was never part of my job description. But I am horrified that that he's trending, that people are getting a hold of this letter somehow and finding it relevant to what's going on in Gaza. I mean, I listened to some of those TikTok videos and I just shook my head, and then I almost wanted to cry. I mean, because even though I was not responsible for tracking bin Laden, I have friends who did that kind of work, and it's a slap in their faces. He's responsible for the deaths of almost 3,000 Americans. And honestly, in terms of the consequences of what he did, he's responsible for the deaths of a whole lot of Afghan citizens, as far as I'm concerned. So watching this trend on TikTok has just been horrifying. I don't think that these young people understand who he was, how much impact what he did had on America, and everything that he stood for. Because while they seem to read that letter, and I reread the letter last night just to refresh my own memory. They seem to read that letter and stop at the complaints about America has a presence in Muslim lands, and America is starving Iraqi children, and America supports Israel instead of Palestine. And they stop, and they don't go on to read the rest of that letter, which is a wholesale condemnation of Western ideology, Western liberalism, classical liberalism. You know, freedom to live your life as you choose, freedom to choose your religion, freedom to choose who you love. They don't read that. And I hope that if they did, they would change their tune, but it's just horrifying. And I think it does not speak well of our educational system if our young people can read this letter from the world's, most notorious, vile terrorist and think it's good and praise this man. It's horrifying to me.
What's more interesting for me is probably Al-Qaeda would have never imagined that the Gen Z, where it was trying to disseminate information through other channels, would find TikTok being one of the platforms where Al-Qaeda, I mean, even you don't need a recruitment video, I guess, for a bunch of young kids coming and saying, I find it to be a life-changing, or it was a life-changing moment for me to come across the letter. On a perspective of looking at terrorism groups, how much of this impact of soft signaling where we see of a little something around, we're saying it's okay to actually read a letter from one of the most notorious terrorists and be okay with the content about what is written?
I hope this does not. I hope this does not help Al-Qaeda gain recruitment. But honestly, I would not be shocked if it did, not on any large scale, right? But there's always going to be disaffected young people. And here in America, we have them, right? Where you don't really know where you fit in. You don't know how you understand the world. You don't know, you might be struggling. Your family might be struggling. You want someone to blame. Oh, I must be struggling because of America's policies towards Israel. Or I must be struggling because we support all the wrong people because look, Osama bin Laden said so, right? And I'm hearing this on TikTok from people who are my age that I respect, sort of, and those kinds of people. It could potentially, they could be inspired by this. And God, I hope that they don't, find inspiration to go join a terrorist group. But I appreciate your amusement when you start to think about, oh my gosh, bin Laden has been dead for over a decade, but Al Qaeda still exists, and now Americans are doing Al Qaeda's recruiting job for them. Right? It is a horrifying thought to think of, and no, I doubt that he ever imagined that Americans would be doing his job.
So the last thing I wanted to ask you about this before we move on to the next part is something like this. Uh, Probably those in the intelligence, and I wanted to ask you this from a perspective of intelligence, of how social media like TikTok has this position, which reflect the challenges of our own society, where it can share information and there is no controlling of its spread as well. Of course, and the letter, guess what? It came from Guardian. Guardian had to take down the letter, and then TikTok had to ban Bin Laden's comments. Actually,
Yeah. So I mean, you could argue there's some free speech issues there, right? That people are discussing this, that they're in the social media arena. This is what that's for. And it does make me wonder if the Guardian or other Western governments are concerned about the concept or the possibility of radicalization here. I mean, they probably do see this trend. If I were watching this from inside the intelligence community, I'd be looking for a couple of things, I think. I'd be looking to see if it was trending in certain communities. I would be looking at who exactly was driving this. Is this organic? Is the United States, is this really like, oh, well, kids are driving this, right? It does not seem to be the case in my view, because if you listen to all of these TikTok videos, they have certain language in common. And like it's like they're all reading from a script. If I'm in the intelligence community, I want to ask who originated that script, right? Who did this? Who got this out there, and what is their motivation? So I'm going to be looking at that. And then I'm also probably, honestly, if I'm the FBI, I would hope that they are looking at some of these accounts and following them and seeing if they're being used to further maybe incite violence, maybe lead to violent protests here or abroad, anywhere. If I'm in the intelligence community, those are the kinds of things that I'd be looking for. And shutting it down, I mean, honestly, given the risk to instability, given the risk for violence, I do think that is a rational request. I'm kind of glad the Guardian did do that. You can still find, like, obviously I found the letter online because I was rereading it. It's, the Guardian, there's archives, right? You can find stuff. Yeah, so it's a fine line, I think, between free speech and allowing free information to be disseminated on these platforms and national security.
And someone of this generation, especially, or around 24, 25, who haven't seen 9/11 or has any such memories, and most memories probably were about the war in Afghanistan or war on terror or what we've seen in Iraq, haven't seen the first phase of it, of what happened with America. As this generation, how, as a professor, would you try to educate the generation about what Al Qaeda has done to America?
Yes. And I mean, I talk to students. I teach a class in international terrorism. I mean, I talk to them about this. When I started teaching the class, a couple of people in each class still had some vague memory of being very young, on 9/11. Now they have no clue. They have no idea that what happened on 9/11. They have no idea why it happened. I absolutely teach my students this. They all understand it. They all know. But you're right. As we move farther from 9/11, as we move farther away from not having troops in Afghanistan and Iraq constantly, young people have no collective memory of that at all. And for whatever reason, they don't seem to be learning it in our schools, which is, I think, a huge failure on our part. Because whether you want to put the blame solely on Al Qaeda, which I do, or say, we do have, maybe we should reconsider some of our foreign policy. Either way, students need to know about those things so that we don't repeat the same mistakes if mistakes were in fact responsible. And so we know what to look for in the run up to terrorist attacks and terrorist threats. So we're doing ourselves as Americans and Westerners a huge disservice, I think, by not stressing history enough in even before they get to college, even in high school and junior high. That's not too young to hear about this.
And especially if it's something as gruesome and as defining moment of American history like 9/11, I guess it should have been the case. And honestly, I don't think even someone even from Al Qaeda would have, in their wildest dream, might have thought that Bin Laden would turn out to be an American hero overnight. And that's really something which, as a generation, that I think even I am around that age, that we should look to what's going wrong actually with the way we're looking things. But I want to move a little bit from that to another interesting visit in America by President Xi. And it was kind of an interesting visit. I want to touch upon a little bit about what's your initial thought about the outcomes or probably the agreements between President Xi and Biden. I will definitely come to the point where he called him a dictator, but a little later on that.
So I'm very excited that it seems like we're going to get pandas back. That's a really important thing. Most of Americans, that was what they wanted out of this meeting, right? Obviously, there were many more important things that were being discussed, but it does seem like we're going to get our pandas back. So I'm very excited. I think it was positive. There seems to be some very important progress. I guess I'll phrase it that way. Made towards normalizing the very stressed ties that we have had with China for the last 6 years or so. The agreements to rein in the production and export of whatever components go into fentanyl, right? I think that was really big for Xi Jinping to give to Biden. The establishment of military communications so that, God forbid, there's a close call in the South China Sea or somewhere near Taiwan, there's a way to actually communicate with each other and hopefully offset any miscalculations, any misunderstandings about each other's intentions there, to sort of ease tensions in the case of that something goes wrong. I think they established I guess you would call it a presidential hotline between Biden and Xi told them, look, if you call, I'll pick up the phone, right? And vice versa. And that's also really, really important. It shows that he doesn't, it shows that at least in the moment, Xi wants to appear to be transparent and to want to smooth over any other glitches, any other disputes that have happened in the relationship and start afresh and to communicate. I think all of those things are incredibly useful. The agreement to not use artificial intelligence and nuclear weapons, that's huge. I know there's been some criticism. Well, we have that technology and China doesn't, so we should exploit it. No, we shouldn't. No, we shouldn't. Artificial intelligence should be nowhere near nuclear weapons. That raises way too many prospects that something is going to go wrong. So I think it was generally a really positive meeting. I mean, she was met with a warm welcome. I didn't see any protesters near him. Now, that doesn't mean there weren't. I just didn't see it in any of the coverage. I think that the Chinese consulate in San Francisco had organized a welcome for him as well on the streets. So it was warm. It was cordial. I think I can't imagine how it would have gone better.
But with a frosty relationship in the last few years or so, especially while President Trump was there in office, do you think this meeting was of a sort that both China and US would want to come and have the conversation with Chinese economy in not a great shape, and US do not want China to further be pushed to join Russian hands in the war in Ukraine. And both of them would want to come in the room and have the conversation because both of them need each other at this point of time.
I think that's part of it. I mean, we certainly want China to not move closer to our enemies, or, in this case, Russia. Clearly, I think it's safe to say Russia's our enemy at this point. We would like for China to use any kind of leverage that it has with Russia to get it to back down, right? To get Putin to change his mind. I'm not sure that's possible, but likewise to get Iran to stop allowing its proxies to attack, encouraging its proxies to attack the United States in various parts of the Middle East where we have troops and military naval vessels. I think that's important. You can't ask Xi to do those things without some kind of, more formal normalization of relations. And I think she also understands that, for the first time in my memory, our economy in the United States is growing faster than China's. And that's certainly got to be embarrassing for Xi Jinping. I think it's understandable why there's a slowing down, but it's certainly not the place that he expected to be. And it's certainly, at least in part, a result of some of the sanctions that Biden has imposed on him, on China. I think some of the refusal to allow certain semiconductors to be made in China, or at least the components for certain semiconductors to be made in China, right? That's impacted their economy in obviously negative ways. Along with regular domestic considerations in China, like closing down the economy for a year, basically because of COVID. That had a huge impact as well. So I do think that there's an understanding that both sides do need each other for certain things. How long Xi Jinping will be convinced to kind of stay on board with this new conciliatory approach after China's economic situation improves, I don't know, right? But I hope that just the fact that they've come to the table, they seem to have great interactions. They seem, there were smiles all around. There didn't seem to be any tension when Biden and Xi were meeting. I hope that just sort of habitualizes the trend towards coming together and talking and working out our problems that way. And I think that is really really important, and that may be the most important takeaway from this meeting, I think.
And somewhat what countries like India, for example, where I'm sitting at, and probably the thought that might be going in that, what about Quad? This is something which is as interesting to see how China was, or President Xi was welcomed actually in US. But for the larger Indo-Pacific equation, do you think anything changes around this, or it will still be to actually contain the aggressive China in Indo-Pacific?
No, I don't think, President Biden is not naive, right? His advisors are not naive. Normalizing relations with China doesn't really mean that we all of a sudden, buy Xi Jinping's argument that China is no threat to the United States. Of course it is, right? Of course they pose a threat to the United States-led liberal international order. They pose a threat to our allies. They've gotten ridiculously close to Filipino ships in the South China Sea. I think there was even a collision this week, if memory serves me. So they definitely pose a threat. And his Biden created, well, Biden didn't create it. Biden and New Zealand and Australia created the AUKUS security arrangement to allow, it's basically part of the goal to contain China, but also to give Australia some access to nuclear submarine technology, I believe. There's the Quad, of course, which I believe India is a part of, also a security focus. Those things aren't going away. And in fact, Biden has continued to talk about those, not this week, but has continued to talk about those throughout the course of his almost 3 years in office. He knows that those things are important. He brought the leaders of South Korea, of Japan to Camp David to talk about regional security issues. The first time that those two sides have sat down together in a room that I can remember. So I think that things may seem warm and fuzzy this week, but that Xi Jinping, the Communist Party of China, international observers should not assume that just because things were all nice this week, that Biden is going to go, oh, okay, things are good now. Maybe we don't need to do these things. No, absolutely not. He's not naive. He knows what China wants to do. He knows China is, has eyes on Taiwan. He knows China. He knows China has, Uyghurs in concentration camps. He knows China is pushing its version of an international order that has nothing to do with human rights and freedom. And that is against everything that Joe Biden personally stands for and has stood for 50 years. So I don't think that he's going to ease up on any of those things.
And moving from that, there has been concerns and criticism about that a certain sanction against the Chinese Public Security Forensic Institute being waived off. And that has actually brought a lot of criticism. But why was it necessary actually to ease off that sanction to increase the relationship?
So I don't know why he chose that particular thing. I mean, I was sort of expecting there to be some gift to China, basically to show a measure of goodwill, right? That's not abnormal. I don't know why it was that thing. And that particular company, like, I think they do like surveillance and like forensics, like identifying facial recognition, all of that stuff. And it, that concerned me just a little bit. And then I thought about it a little more, and I wonder if it is because in reality, that sanction does not impact what China's doing in Xinjiang at all. That sanction alone really isn't having or achieving the goal of curtailing what China's trying to do with selling, exporting its tools of surveillance to other authoritarian countries. And he may have just thought that if there is something easy to back off of, that is the most obvious one. That said, I do understand the symbolism, right? I do understand like that company provides tools of repression in Xinjiang. That country provides tools that are denying Uyghurs basic human rights in the most brutal of ways. And so I do understand the concern.
So a couple of last questions. And the first thing that I wanted to ask you is the conversation actually in the end, while the meeting was getting over in a press conference where President Biden did call President Xi a dictator. And we have seen the reaction of I'm sure that was not a part of the plan. But in the end, doesn't this entire meeting look like a good script between the two leaders who just came for the meeting, agreeing to play their part? But within deep down, both President Biden and Xi holds what they hold true to their own values. And as President Biden mentioned, that he is a dictator because he runs the country.
Yeah, I mean, when he made the dictator comment, I immediately cringed and I was like, "Oh no, why did you have to say that?" But he's not wrong, right? I mean, he's not wrong. If Xi Jinping doesn't want to be called a dictator, then don't put pressure on everybody to rewrite the Chinese constitution to give you the authority to remain, in office for life. Don't create concentration camps across Xinjiang. Don't repress all the dissenters. Don't repress dissidents. Don't send Communist Party stooges around the globe to harass people who support Taiwan or who support Uyghurs or who are Uyghur, right? Just don't do those things and you won't be called a dictator. So like there's a very easy fix for Xi Jinping. And so that ball is kind of in his court. Although Biden did say, he qualified it and he's like, look, he is a dictator in the sense that he's a guy who runs a communist country, right? So I think he did walk it back. He softened it a little bit. But yeah, I saw Secretary of State Blinken's face when he said that, and I was like, oh, yeah, that's not going to go over very well in the State Department, and they're going to have to answer a lot of questions. But again, I don't think that really shocked Xi Jinping. I really doubt that it offends him on a personal level to be called that, because he is one. In his heart, he has to know that he is a dictator. China is a totalitarian state. That said, that aside, I don't think that, she made some demands in regard to Taiwan, right? He let it be known where his values are, right? Reunification, all of those things. Joe Biden, made it clear where his line is on Taiwan. He used the dictator language. He urged Xi to respect the electoral, respect the voters of Taiwan, basically. I mean, they both expressed their own values, and I think they stuck to them. And I think that maybe both sides have come to the conclusion, at least I hope that they have, that we can use this language, we can say what we believe, but at the end of the day, we're still going to come back to the table because we have more things in common that should unite us and inspire us to work together than we have things that divide us. Just because we have a differing ideology does not mean that we can't, at day's end, sit down and work with each other. So I'm hoping that dictator comment just sort of dies in the margins. I know it didn't go over well in Chinese media. But I also know that the last time he said it, Xi Jinping was a lot more offended. There were statements directly attributed to him, and I have not seen that this time. So I really do hope that we're at that, more mature stage in the relationship and things just progress in an upward trajectory from here.
And in fact, this is also interesting because one of the White House reporters asked Xi Jinping about the fact whether would you consider trusting President Biden, and he smiled and he didn't answer that as well. So I'm sure in both the equation, they know what they are into, and probably they just want to make sure that the relationship doesn't get frosty just because of casual commenting. But I just want to understand the final thing that if you could address that, what I asked you, and about how does this meeting actually ease off the tensions or probably attract foreign investor during the visit to the US, President Xi's visit?
How does it, say that again, how does it ease tensions?
Ease tensions and probably would attract foreign investment from US.
So there were some meetings apparently with Xi Jinping and American CEOs, right? American investors who are understandably, for the last several years, very nervous about doing business in China, right? They have the potential to be, they could be sanctioned if they violate our sanctions. There's fear that he is, let's just face it, a dictator of a authoritarian state. He could theoretically confiscate private investment, privately owned property. We've seen Americans, we've seen Canadian CEOs imprisoned and held there for long periods of time for various reasons due to various diplomatic dust-ups. So there's a lot of anxiety over investing there. I don't think that one meeting is going to, or one visit is going to ease that angst. But I'm guessing that was also kind of a springboard for these CEOs. Like, they're probably looking at it as, okay, well, this is a starting point. I don't know what Xi Jinping actually told them in these meetings. I haven't read anything or heard anything that suggests what went on inside the meetings beyond the general. He was trying to soothe anxiety. I'm not sure that they can soothe their anxiety in a single meeting. But again, that's a starting point, right? That's a starting point. Will it be the starting point for them to China? I think that Xi Jinping is going to have to I think he does probably understand that he doesn't have the luxury right now of getting offended by comments like the dictator comment or by anything else that might come along to just kind of be a stumbling block in the relationship, because his key priority is improving China's economic situation. And in order to do that, he absolutely has to get American investment back into China. And I think there's a long way for him to go to actually convince that investment to come back. But getting offended and proving that he is a dictator is certainly not the way to do it.
Well, that's all the question that I had. And for all our viewers, actually, it's kind of coincidence that we're talking about a video on TikTok and Xi Jinping's visit. It's completely unrelated, but that happened actually on the same week. But thank you so much, ma'am, for taking your time and speaking to us.
Thanks so much for having me. I enjoyed it.